Buenas tardes, good evening. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the Instituto Cervantes, as always, to give us the platform to continue with our presentations, Authors in Search of a Reader. The idea, for those who don't know what it's about, is looking at some just specific Latin American writers who have been translated into English, but still remain quite unknown for the English-speaking public. And today we got one which is a truly original, a person that you will see from the conversation and my two guests how good he is. And we're going to talk about the Argentinian writer Roberto Arlt, a person who lived only 42 years of age, was born in 1900s and died in 1942, and produced 3-4 novels perhaps, but 3 that come to my mind straight away: El Juguete Rabioso, The Mad Toy, Los Siete Locos, 7 Madmen, and El Lanzallamas, a Flamethrower. And classics, all of them, particularly the 7 Madmen.
Which love, don't forget.
Yes, and then we got the other one, which is the one after that. Well, I'm sure El Amor Brujo, thank you. That was the one I'm missing. But I have the pleasure, and this is a real pleasure, to have the translator of Roberto Arlt here with us, Nick Caistor, who has translated the 7 Madmen and also El Juguete Rabioso, the Mad Toy. You have, yeah. Nick, yes. And the artist and cartoonist and artian par excellence, Oscar Grillo, who...
Will you kindly call me Pencil Pusher?
Pencil Pusher, I could call you Pencil Pusher, no problem at all, yes. But also, the only thing that I want to say is that Nick has just published a book recently, which is called Mexico City, The Cradle of Empires. It's Nick's latest book. And you can see Nick, he's a well-known translator, has translated several Latin American writers. And the last time we were here, we were talking about Juan Carlos Onetti, the Uruguayan writer. So I'm going to start with you, Nick, because I know Oscar will tell us a lot of stories about Arlt's life, and it will be fantastic.
With his life with Oscar.
But before I get Oscar, I'm going to ask you about the actual translations of Roberto Arlt, because we were talking with Oscar about this. We did a program in Spanish about it, and one of the things we were talking was about some of the verbs that Arlt uses. He uses very strange kind of sentences in Spanish. Mm-hmm. In fact, in his preface of the Flamethrower, he actually defends himself. He says, "Oh, people think that my style is no good, but blah blah." So basically, he confronts his critics about the way in he writes. As a translator, how difficult, how challenging was to translate Roberto Arlt?
Well, as you say, it was very challenging. My only excuse is that I was much younger then, and I was much bolder then, so I just went through it. But as you mentioned in that preface to Lanzallamas, the Flamethrowers, he says that it's a bit like Virginia Woolf, strangely enough, A Room of One's Own. He said, if only I had the time and the money and a proper desk in a proper room, of course I could write well, but no, I haven't got any of that. I have to write when I'm at the newspaper or whatever, and I write whatever comes out. I think you should keep in mind as well that his father, neither his father nor his mother, as far as I know, between themselves spoke Spanish. I think they probably spoke German to each other, no? His mother was from Trieste, so she probably spoke the Triestino dialect. His father was from Austria, I think, so... Poznan, which... Yeah. So he didn't speak a natural Spanish, so when they got to Buenos Aires, I suspect they spoke coqueliche, you know? They spoke whatever they could. And of course, Buenos Aires in the 1920s, it was full of immigrants who were speaking their own languages. And that's what I liked about Arlt. You got the sense of the rawness of it, the rawness of the Spanish language. He was probably using some of these words for the first time, the verbs and all the other things. And this is what you have to try and get through in a translation, of course, without the reader thinking that it's you who just doesn't understand, who can't write English. You have to keep some of the strangeness of it as much as you can. But sometimes I would scratch my head and think, well, did he really say that? Is that what he meant? Did he know what he was saying? Sometimes you feel completely lost. Recently, I've been translating El Jorobadito, the little hunchback, which is about Rigoletto. And in the middle of this story, which, like a lot of Arlt, is pretty misogynist. It's about how a woman is trying to entrap him into marriage. This character, and the narrator says to Rigoletto, he's called Rigoletto because he's a little jorobadito. And I hope maybe someone here knows the answer, but he says to Rigoletto, mira, Rigoletto, no seas perverso. Prefiero cualquier cosa a verte pegándole con un látigo a un inocente cerda.
Whoa. He's hitting the south.
He's hitting
nothing but that. It's
just
punishing an animal.
And just in the middle of this description of going to a house in the suburbs of Buenos Aires.
It's not any form of slang or anything.
Yeah.
It describes the act of perversion of the guy who hits female pig.
It just happens to be there, happens to be around. So he hits the pig. I thought it must have some second or third meanings. I thought it might mean to masturbate, but I didn't put that.
That sounds good, though.
It could be. But going back to his language, I was reading recently that Umberto Eco said, maybe we'll ask you the question, what's the most exciting novel ever written? And he says, The Count of Monte Cristo. What's the worst written novel ever written? The Count of Monte Cristo. And it's that kind of duality that you get, I think, in Arlt. It's very badly written, but you can't resist it. It is so exciting, and all the personajes, all the characters lead you on through all this kind of quite a lot of nonsense. Yeah.
Indeed.
To make an addition to what this gentleman said, because I studied that not as a scholar, which I am not, as an admirer of art. And I realized if you go to the National Gallery, you would find paintings which are Flemish paintings. They let you touch them, they have beautiful smooth surfaces, and they are beautiful paintings with all the sense of light, perspective. Everything else is working beautifully. But then you see Rembrandt, and the joy of Rembrandt is the harshness of his painting. The late Rembrandt is a perfect painter because he paints paintings. In my view, Arlt lived in the city of Buenos Aires with all the contradictions and the beauty of living in Buenos Aires, and the language he heard in the street, and the language he read in the terrible translations of the French novels of the Count of Monte Cristo among them, or Eugenio Sue, who was a great hero of him, or Ponson du Terrail. The terrible translations also advise his language. He uses even worse formats than language, which is to talk to the reader and say, well, we'll talk about this later. He's in the middle of a passage which is written beautifully and interrupts it to say something like that. But he used to read that kind of literature. I love it.
I'm thinking about what Nick said about the contrasting things. I mean, and this is a writer that in 1 minute he's talking about how bad that bed is. He basically has a whole description in El Juguete Rabioso about the first night that he spends with the librarian and how bad the mattress is and stuff like that.
The bookseller.
Yeah, the bookseller. And then the next passage is about he fantasizing about these beautiful women and falling in love with these beautiful women. We don't know if these women are prostitutes or who are there. Yeah, but he talks in such a poetic manner, changing from how crappy the bed is to this poetic remembrance of love and stuff. But what I want to talk to you about, my first question to you, Oscar, is your impression the first time you read Arlt. And I tell you this, and forgive me, because I'm not Argentinian, and Arlt is not very well known outside Argentina, even for Latin America. Even for Latin American standards, not many people have read Arlt. But lately, Arlt is a kind of late discovery of Argentinian literature. Late in the sense that only into the 50s and 60s people started to pay attention to Arlt.
Yeah, even later, as a matter of fact. In the 50s, I started to read Roberto Arlt possibly in 1959, 1960. I must have been 15, 16 years old. And the two books you could find were Aguafuertes Porteñas in Losada, and the other one was El Jorobadito, which is the Little Hunchback. Actually, the title published in the Nación supplement, published by Borges, of all things, was called The Insolent Hunchback. I quite like that title, even if it's not the one used in the short stories. But the thing with him is, like, it was difficult to get. So you know what we managed to do? We started to ask friends if someone knew someone who had a book, and then we started to look. We made a circle of friends, and the idea was to pass the book. Say, 7 Madmen appear almost immediately as we were searching for it, and then we read the original, the recent edition. But then later on, the Flamethrowers, which is the continuity, no question, it's one single novel, and we need to read both in order to make sense. it was a nightmare to find, and we actually were looking for it in practically every corner of the city, and we found an old woman who had a copy, and then when we read it, we had to pass one by one to see that we had to be careful because it was very fragile as well. Yeah. So the point is, like, this is 1962, 63, let's say, and there was no Arlt available. Yeah. I think when Arlt started to be seen and published must have been quite late 60s, because they started to publish the other Aguafuertes sketches. And then that one actually made it more available to other people. And the Italians did publish in 1970 a translation. The French did almost immediately the same. And there was an American edition. What is the translator of that?
I can't remember. Was it Aret Ortiz? Yeah.
In the 60s, wasn't it?
In the 60s, yes. It is. I think, to go back to your question, I think that's one of the problems for Arlt, because outside Argentina, he was discovered with the boom, the Latin American boom. And he very much is not the magical realist that people were promoting in the boom. And you see, it was a good translation, but I'll just read you one paragraph from that translation, and see if you can spot the undeliberate mistake, which is relevant to what I've just been saying. So Erdogan has just been sacked. He's been told he has to repay the money he's stolen, and he's, as usual, he's wandering around Buenos Aires. See if you can hear what the mistake was in the American translation from the 1960s. He walked along the lonely arcades of Arenales and Talcahuano, the corners of Charcas and Rodriguez Peña, the crossroads of Montevideo and Quintana, enjoying this magnificent architectural spectacle forever denied to the poor and wretched. Leaves from the banana trees crunched under his feet as he stared up at the rounded panes of the huge windows, silvered by the gleaming white of their lace curtains. This was a world far from the brutish city he knew, another world he could feel his heart yearning for with a slow, heavy beat. What?
The banana trees. The banana trees.
Los plátanos.
Los plátanos.
Plátanos de Buenos Aires. If you're translating in the States and you see Latin America as a tropical paradise,
oh my
those
God.
plátanos, they're just like the London plane trees. Of course, they were planted in the late 19th century by Thais, was it, the French garden designer?
Yeah.
But the Americans want everything to be magical realist, so they put the banana trees lining Alvear.
Nicola, when I went to Italy, I was in Milan and I knew the seven madmen appeared, I Siete Pazzi, and I went to buy it in a bookshop. And then the guy in the shop said, "No, we don't have it, but you shouldn't read it." I said, "Why not?" "It's not as good as Garcia Marquez." I say, "Well,
whoa.
He was born in a place with palm trees. I was born in a city of concrete and asphalt, you know."
And let's talk about that for both of you. The Seven Madmen appears in 1929. At the same time, almost simultaneously, as Lady Chatterley's Lover. Okay, and here, well, the contrasting societies of English society at the turn of the century with the Argentinian, the Seven Madmen, the material that you have there, you got a book that talk about sex, talk about politics, talk about anarchism, terrorism, how to actually predict, for me as a Colombian again, and foresees more or less the mechanics of Peronism that came later in Argentina. Well, I know. Well, could be. I mean, the thing, but the thing is, the content is truly modern. It's quite explicit in certain parts. When you were reading that novel as an Englishman, the first time that you read it, come to your mind about the time when the book was written, because I was very perplexed about. I'm reading something was written in the 1920s, and look how modern it is.
Mm. Yes, in fact, in my life outside here, I've just been reading what the person who perhaps characterized English novel in the 1920s more even than Lawrence, which is Virginia Woolf. And if you look at something like To the Lighthouse or Orlando, which were published more or less around the same time, they're aiming for something totally different, looking for something completely different.
Do you know who I propose is an English writer? Patrick Hamilton.
Yeah?
In 20,000.
Do you know Patrick Hamilton? Hangover Square? It's a brilliant book.
Superb writer. Unfortunately, he made plays that were turned into movies like Dial M for Murder, and he made also Rope, that Hitchcock made both films.
Okay.
But he was also a man who wrote about urban London, about poor people. He
Yeah.
was married to a prostitute. He took her home, and the family went mad.
Just like in Siete Locos.
I strongly recommend that.
But you're going back to my first reaction to Arlt. In fact, it was when I was living in Buenos Aires in the mid-1970s. And if ever you want a crazy period in Argentine life, that was the 1970s, the mid-1970s. But the language that was spoken, even by educated people, was very close to the street language that Arlt has. You know, that's the glory of Buenos Aires, the way that people speak there. I helped later, a few years later, I helped with a BBC learning Spanish course. And I recorded people in Argentina, and they turned them all down because they couldn't understand them. Yeah. You know, the way they were speaking, the speed they were speaking, and the language they were speaking. Nowhere else do you get that within Latin America or Spain, obviously. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it for me, I was reading Arlt and hearing that in the cafes in the corner of the street and in the people you meet in the street and in the family I was living with. Yeah. So it was kind of, as you say, it felt not just modern, but, this is the world I'm living in at the moment. You would go down Corrientes and you would meet 7 madmen in un cuadro. Yeah.
One thing about Arlt, which is very important, I like to remark on that more than the language, which is he was born in 1900, a pivotal period in the history of the 20th century. Because he then lived the first moment of the most horrific period in history. When he was 14 years old, they killed the Archduke there, and then a horrific debacle happened in the world. He was a boy, but he was a reader. He must have read the papers of the period, and then he was very informed about the catastrophes and the disasters. Yeah. And one of the things about, he's quite well informed of what's going on, because it includes in Los Lanzallamas, the flamethrowers, the scene of the man who is being gassed in the trenches. And then he actually started to talk about how horrible it is that men make such an effort to kill other people, and they make extraordinary, delicate balance of invention in order to be more efficient at killing. And he talks of the gassed man talks about when they mix a little bit of this poison with a little bit, that poison will make it more efficient. And this is what they've done, and they do it today as well when they have the bombs they drop in Yemen on places like that. But Arlt was aware of it, and he wrote about it, even if he wrote so many years later.
No, absolutely. There are pages in which actually he describes the different ways of being more effective using chemical weapons. Chemical weapons, in fact. Oscar, this is for you, and you got encyclopedical knowledge about Roberto Arlt. Well, you know quite a few, more than many people I know. Yes, that's for sure, more than me. The thing is this: he was a liar. He was changing names. He was changing his name, changing even the day of his birth. Writers tend to mythologize themselves. Exactly. No, that's what writers do. Writers mythologize themselves. But with Arlt, we got a different kind of thing, because also many of the things, his relationships with women, the misogyny, the things about acquaintances with prostitutes. He was a well-paid.
He was not a well-paid.
He was a well-paid? Okay. Fine.
He was actually a man with economic difficulties. I know it for a fact because I met friends of him, and apparently the guy was always trying to get a little penny here or there. He actually ended his life trying to invent stockings for women that actually would give him a little money. And his last wife, this is Elizabeth Shine. Elizabeth is with an S. You wrote it with a Z. That's wrong. But in any case, she actually said that they always were quarreling for money, because he supported as well his sister and his mother.
So he's algo fuerte.
No, he wasn't. But the thing is this: can I actually go somewhere else and they'll say something I need to say? I think people may not know Arlt, and I'd like to give you a little information here. Roberto Arlt always earned his living. One person said, can't remember who was it, possibly Bolaños, I'm not sure, but he said that at certain age, Borges went to Switzerland. At 16, Borges went to Switzerland. Roberto Arlt was looking for work, and he tried every damn job there is on earth, and the worst, the most menial, the most pathetic, the most insulting, humiliating job. And he was desperate about making a living. Now, can I say what he did in the process of trying to make a living? He wrote in the Critica newspaper. Who was he worked as a police reporter. He actually lived there a very short time. He stayed less than a year in Critica. He wrote 22 known chronicles, which are exquisite, and they are published. You can find a book called El Fascineroso. He wrote 2,000 aguafuerte porteñas for El Mundo. He wrote 4 novels. He wrote 12 plays. He wrote 73 short stories, which he made money with. He put in different magazines. I knew people who went to queue behind him to get paid for it. And he was in a hurry always. I want my money, I want my money. Then he wrote 238 chronicles at the end of his life when he finished doing the aguafuertes, because he was up to here of his aguafuertes. Then he wrote chronicles about what was going on in the world at the time. He talked about the raising of Nazism, and it's an extraordinary book which I strongly recommend to those who read Spanish. It's called A Landscape in the Clouds. That's his very last chronicle, he done the day he died. And he's a man who actually wrote enormous amounts of words in order to make a living. But in the process of trying to make a living, he was writing great literature. Onetti was critical of his aguafuertes. I found his aguafuertes essential in order to read art. And if you read this apparently light writing, because even when they announce it in the newspapers, there are one with drawings there, where are comic. It's supposed to be, oh, they'll make you laugh. Mm-hmm. Jesus, they make you laugh about people who are going to commit suicide, and the first thing they do is they look at the statue in the parks and say, this is always people who are going to kill himself, herself. Always sit there looking at the statues of the park. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. And he's funny. Well, he was funny, though. I found out very funny. Yeah. Because art occasionally can have moments of madness, like when he got 2 characters, you may remember, in Seven Mad Men, or in Los Lanzallamas, Los Espila. It's taken straight away from the Spanish picaresque. Mm-hmm. These guys themselves as mendicants. So they're really poor anyway, but one pretends to be blind. And they go in the streets fighting like 2 idiots. And one of them actually doesn't give him all the money they give. It's amazingly funny. Art has this genius for the grotesque of every format. And I love that. I love grotesque because it's like Goya, he admired, or it's Hieronymus Bosch, who he admired too. He mentioned that. And this is the moment when you start to find a real artist in art. The man who tried to make a living, God damn it. Yeah. Okay. God bless you.
Fine, no problem. Good. The question about money, I remember it's Piglia who says that art was earning more money than Borges. And Piglia gives probably wrongly.
He didn't need to earn money.
Yeah.
He was rich.
Yeah.
Borges didn't need to go and get a job.
But probably and probably he will have a proper job. At least Roberto Arlt was making more, had to make a living.
Yeah, it's more, yeah.
I'm going to come back to the humor because it is humorous. It's very funny in a kind of grotesque way. But I want to talk to you, Nick, about here is Erdosain, for example, El Rufián Melancólico. Those names. We have existentialism going through and through, happening at the same time, or even sometimes even before existentialism appeared in Europe in full force. Mm-hmm. That's something which is very peculiar to Rio de la Plata, isn't it? Nowhere in the world will happen that. I mean, it happens to be in Latin America, happens to be in the austral part of Latin America, but this existentialist inclination towards writing and literature, why do you think that is? Because art is very much in the center of that.
Yeah, I think Oscar could answer, or Argentinians could answer better why, but it's certainly...
Think of tango, that's the only thing.
But Arlt didn't like tango as far as I know. But the question that I wonder about is that there is, as you say, there are scenes in Seven Mad Men, Siete Locos, that are pure existentialism. Yeah. There's a scene where he climbs up an acacia tree in the early morning because he's completely desperate and sees the soul and realizes the absurdity of life. And that is 7 or 8 years before Sartre's La Nausée, where he does exactly the same thing. He's sitting in a park looking at a tree and he realizes, the absurdity of life, that the tree is an object, I'm an object, there's no soul, there's no reason for existence. It's all completely contingent. And what I wondered when I was translating, and since if Arlt had been writing in France, that would have been existentialism then, wouldn't it? But yeah, Céline's the closest to it, isn't it? Yeah.
They go rowing to America.
Yeah. But as to why this strain in Argentina? Why this?
The artist over there, the art of Argentina, which is always borrowing from some artists from Europe mostly, but the true art from Argentina, which is the grotesque. Molina Campos among them is a man who drew gauchos, but he drew them like Goya wood or maybe Gross. The thing with the Argentinian art is that sense of we are not perfect, but this is what we are, and the imperfection of thought, the imperfection of intellect, the imperfection of behavior creates this soup of despair, and at the same time I say, well, but this is what it is, which in my view is what characterizes a very unknown culture. Because don't forget, since the Falklands War, we stopped understanding each other completely, and we won't be able to after Maradona's goal anyway. But essentially, we had to understand that the Argentinians have a way to be, which is quite special. I'm not saying good, by no means. I say it's utterly imperfect. But I quite like the idea of being slightly different. I traveled, not really much, but I went to Chile. And I just realized it's nothing in common, nothing. No Brazilians, no. Brazilians are so damn happy. And when you look at them, it's happy about bloody what, mate? They still have a president like the one they have now, but been so bloody happy. In Argentina, art would have gone mad.
Talking about writers and talking about translations and crappy translations, Dostoevsky. I read Dostoevsky in very dodgy translations in Buenos Aires. Yes. Is that the case, isn't it?
Yes. No, by the way, Dostoevsky died 8 years before Arlt was born.
Okay.
Means nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe say you could describe them as contemporaries if you wish. Well, they say, I believe he should say this, but I understand that Dostoevsky is a bad writer, but he's a great novelist.
Okay, I don't know. Is Dostoevsky a bad writer and a great novelist?
It's the whole thing about whether style makes a great novel, and whether the actual form and being aware of the form is what makes a great novel. But it's not. It's the quota of madness in it, isn't it? It's the quota of genius in it.
And the contrasting things.
Yeah. I mean, Cortázar was a great lover of Arlt, and he wrote a very good preface, I think, to a new edition in Argentina in the 80s. And he says, he lists all the different mad ideas in Siete Locos in particular, and says, as you can see, Arlt didn't have any ideas, but he had genius. And I think that's true. Whether that's true of all Argentines, they tend to think so. I don't know. I think they are different. But where does that melancholy come from? Is gonfio, I think, was one word that people know.
It's an Italian word.
Yeah. But where does that come from? Why?
It's the people that actually left something behind. They are not those who are not Jewish are Italians. Those who are not Italians are Spanish. Those who are not Spanish are
Irish.
Czechoslovakians. I mean, I lived in a neighborhood where nobody spoke Spanish. They spoke languages. I mean, not to say I was Arlt. I never would be Arlt, but I know exactly what it feels like to be in a neighborhood which nobody seems to understand each other. But they left behind something which is, of course, lost. The sense of loss is one of the prevalent arguments or feelings of tango. He didn't like tango, but he wrote some beautiful lines about tango. You may know the short stories. You are doing now Las Fieras.
No.
But if you're doing El Jorobadito, Las Fieras is one of the short stories. And Las Fieras has got 3 pages talking about tango, and the description he makes about tango, who pretended not to like, are so poignant and powerful. He's talking about criminals, how bored they are for being criminals. Nothing happens. That's why they kill. That's why they do stupid things. But when someone comes and brings a bandoneon and a guitar and sings, everybody becomes a philosopher. It's beautifully written by Arlt. Beautifully. Actually, it's exquisite literature. Not only it's a good idea, which I think is a good idea as well, to have animals to like art.
I think that point that you said about the journey for Europe, I think it's such a valid point, Oscar, because our previous conversation here at the Cervantes was of Onetti. And with Onetti, this kind of relentless melancholy, relentless existentialist anguish, I think comes from a journey of being born in Latin America and just journeying for Europe. I don't know, that's the way I read it. Perhaps that's my own interpretation as a reader. This is a person who is always unhappy in his own skin because he's not where he's supposed to be, or no, he's who he's supposed to be. But let's go back to
Can I say something on what you say? It's very interesting because you mentioned Onetti. Onetti was a great fan of Arlt. He wrote great things about Arlt. One of the few guys who really loved him. And Onetti is a man who was an European in Uruguay, and when he went to Europe, he had to go to Europe, he would be killed otherwise, he actually decided to do nothing, and he laid in a bed for the last so many years of his life. But one thing is, because I know friends of Onetti, I never met Onetti, but I know enough about Onetti. He was a serial womanizer. And one of the things it links with art as well, in many ways, is the fantastic desire, sexual desire, utterly confused desire, had to be mixed with confusion and with deformity and with guilt. And I think in many ways, I know for a fact that, for instance, his wife knew of some of his affairs. And one day, Onetti was in a bar and was sitting with his wife and a friend who told me the story. And then when a woman who was a lover walked in, she said, his wife said to him, "If you want me, I'll go." And he said, "No, you are my faithful dog. If I was her, I would punch his face in such a way that he would be dead." But nonetheless, that's a kind of confusion, sexual attraction people like Arlt and Onetti had. When Arlt talk about sex, he's the least erotic writer ever, but he's so also profoundly sexual. Because in 1920, well, he's got the episode with the homosexual in El Juguete Rabioso, which is actually a fantastic confusion of a man who wants to have sex illicitly in a hotel room, and the other one cannot accept his homosexuality. And it still is an attraction. Both of them are attracted to each other in a complex way. And not to mention then the confusion of sex between Erdogan and Elsa when she lives with the mayor.
Or the astrologer who...
the astrologer is a castrate man who apparently is inordinately powerfully sexual.
Yeah, he's a castrated man.
No bollocks, let me put it that way. Art would have said bollocks. No, but it's as well the kind of dream he had. He talks about trying to pervert a 12-year-old girl, which is incredibly uncomfortable to read.
No, it's true. The thing about the deformities you're talking about, one of the main characters in siete, well, one of the characters in Siete Locos is La Coja, the woman who limps, the limping woman.
Doesn't.
Yeah. She's pretending to be.
Her husband is an idiot and say, "Oh, she's a limping woman." And she doesn't limp at all.
Yes, I did. Let's go back to the humor in Arlt, because there are parts which are so funny. For example, in El Juguete Rabioso, the mad toy, as translated in English, these people stealing books from a school library. Yeah. They actually go and take it, and then you got, like in Quixote, in chapter number 6, you got a little bit of literary criticism there. See, he picks up Baudelaire and reads some lines of Baudelaire. So, this is not too bad. I take this book.
They rob to destroy.
Yeah, okay.
They don't want to possess. They actually go to do damage. It's the school, after all, is what punished them, because daily they had to go to school where they've been told off by the teachers or whatever. And then when they go to rob, they are not going to get books that they can sell to a bookseller like Don Gaetano. It's just simply, by the way, I met Don Gaetano. Really, he existed. That's a different story. But nonetheless, they burn the books. They destroy the books. But he said, "But no, we are going to keep this." And he keeps two. He keeps Baudelaire, and he keeps also a chemistry treaty.
And they pick up mathematics books. This is advanced mathematics. This must be more expensive than basic mathematics. But he's very curious. I mean, the humor in Arlt is a kind of grotesque, isn't it? It's impossible not to laugh, but you laugh with it's a hollow kind of laughter that we have because it's unbelievable.
I'm not sure that I ever laughed at it. I think it's really? so dark. It's so black. It's it's like the Goya dark paintings. You don't laugh at them. But you kind of, it's so, I suppose it's so grotesque, it's so, I suppose afterwards you might laugh, but because you've escaped from it. What interested me in what you and Oscar were saying, though, is where does this sense of guilt come from in Argentina? Why he feels guilty all the way through because he's stealing money, but it's one of the typical traits, isn't it? Everybody feels guilty. But because you left the home country, because you left.
There's so many dictatorships have told us you better pretend you're sorry. I'm sorry about this. Catholicism.
It's from Catholicism, is it? Yeah, could be.
First of all, Art's mom, there's a very important thing which is interesting. She was an esoteric woman. She was crazy about esotericism. And that's the reason why his first book, I read it, by the way, in case you care, is the one of occult science, occultism in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And his mom was crazy about astrology and about the thing, and she read Madame Blavatsky and so on and so forth. They were into esotericism. One thing I need to say to him, I read one of Arlt's mom's letter, and she actually made a lot of his mistakes in Spanish, which are from Italian. So obviously she spoke Italian at home, yeah.
But it's true the whole thing about the astrology and stuff like that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that again comes through in the book, doesn't it? People will believe in anything. There's a famous quote by G.K. Chesterton, who was one of Borges' favorite authors. It goes back to what you were saying, that the problem when people stop believing in God is not that they believe in nothing, but they believe in anything. And that seems to me the situation in Argentina, that people had lost faith, even the Italians there lost faith, so they believe in anything, from astrology to any mumbo jumbo.
I was sent actually to a witch doctoress.
Really?
To get me cured for something when I was a kid.
Yeah, well, it's part of the Latin American tradition, those witch doctors and stuff. But it's also this sense of worthlessness. It's also, Erdosain has it. I'm going to read a little passage in Spanish, because that's what I got here, which made me laugh. And it's to do with a teosopho, And this is when Silvio goes, he's trying to get for a new job. He's fed up working for the bookseller, so he's trying to get a new job. And he said, al señor Sousa, volviéndose al teósofo impasible, dijo, a este negro le voy a hacer estudiar para médico. ¿Qué le parece, Demetrio? El teósofo, sin inmutarse, está bien, aunque todo hombre pueda ser útil a la humanidad por más insignificante que sea su posición social. Jeje, usted siempre filósofo. Y el señor Sosa, volviéndose a mí, dijo, a ver, amigo, Aister, escriba lo que se le ocurra en este momento. Vacilé. Después anoté con un precioso lapicero de oro que deferente el hombre me entregó. Él escribió, la cal hierve cuando la mojan.
Wow.
Entonces llega y dice el teósofo.
That guy existed, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure that. Yes, there you are.
He was a famous writer who wrote a lot of erotica in Buenos Aires, and he was a very, very good broadcaster as well.
But llega y dice, medio anarquista, ¿eh?
No,
with that line, he just decided that he's an anarchist. Cuide su cerebro, amiguito, cuídelo, que entre los 20 y 22 años va a sufrir un surmenage. Surmenage, yes. But it's also like that. And then he does a description about, he just tells his characteristic just by his physical appearance. Yeah. And this whole thing about astrology, one of the main characters is the astrologer. How he's going to pay for the revolution? With the brothels.
Revenue from
the brothels,
He will pay for a revolution. Well, you should try.
Yes. And who is the one who organized the brothel industry? Is el rufián melancólico, the melancholic, how would you translate that, Vic?
I think I made a mistake there. I didn't. I think I did. I told you I was very young then. I didn't know.
How do you translate
I translated melancholic thug, but it should be a pimp. Melancholic pimp,
okay,
yeah. No, that's the second time you've done that.
Well, can I make a comment before we go too further? Because time passes and therefore we're not going for the important point. This man wrote an inordinate amount of material. And one thing which are somehow, by concentrating in Seven Madmen and flamethrowers, we are forgetting now El Amor Brujo, which is a bad novel, but it's a great bad novel. In many ways, you may like Buñuel when he makes true surrealist films where things are grotesque and funny, like the film about the bourgeoisie or The Secret Object of Desire. But Buñuel as well, in Mexico, made melodramas, just melodramas. They were like any melodrama made in Latin America in the period. Yeah. Well, no, that was a social... No, that's not quite a good example because it was a social criticism. But when he did El is a hilarious film. I love it, with Delia Garcés and Arturo de Córdoba. I see it often. I like it very much. But it's a melodrama. It's about a jealous man, a completely mad, jealous man. In The Bewitched Love, El Amor Brujo, the relationship between this married man, this oldish married man, with this very young girl, she's maybe 16, 17, who meets casually in Retiro, it's a train station in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And he just goes like a child behind her, but he's a married guy. He feels guilty for actually thinking, but he can't resist. He says, I would like to pervert her. And there's a moment where he asks her, are you a virgin? Oh, and she gets very shocked. And the problem of Arlt, half of the novel is she or is she not a virgin? That's the most important bloody point in the whole. But the social criticism to the bourgeoisie in that book is absolutely fabulous. Not the most interesting novel, but it's so damn readable, you know.
And I think you're spot on, this criticism of bourgeois life. Now, a question for you, Oscar, because my knowledge of Arlt is limited to 3 novels, and the Aguafuertes and the short story. So I haven't read his plays, for example.
I know his plays. I'm taking one I'm illustrating.
So my question to you, is he maintaining the same style across different kind of formats? Theater format, short story format, novel format. Is he as grotesque in his plays as he's in his novel?
Yes, there is. One thing which is important, he wasn't a good playwright. I think he was a very, very weak playwright. But he wrote a masterpiece called 300 Millions. 300 Millions is a masterpiece. It's in format, in language, in ideas. Did you read 300 Millions? 300 Millions is a very simple story. It's a maid who is now possibly ill, possibly she has TB. It's difficult to actually know that. But it's mentioned. Actually is having a very bad night, and is actually because there is a party in the house outside. It's not in the room where she is trying to figure out what to do with her life, as most characters in Arlt. And then she say, "I'm so ugly and so thin, and not even death will like me." And then death comes, and they had the best dialogue written in a play in Argentina in the whole history of Argentinian theater, I think. And it's when death feels pity for her. He says, "I want to take you with me because this is what I do. But I think the problem is you are not doing the things right. You're going to make it easy for me. I told you many times you should eat." Actually, what he said, "You should eat spam." Actually, jamón del diablo, he says. But he said, "You should eat spam. You should put on weight." And death becomes incredibly friendly to this woman he needs to take. Suddenly, the characters of the dreams, which appear in the prologue, which are the different characters who visit people in their dreams. One of them is Rocambole by Ponson du Terrail. The Byzantine Queen, which is a character from Carnival, not interesting. The Devil, who can make miracles, like make a little boy become a boxing world champion. It's got the Cubic Man, which is the invention of a man who never finishes his plan and left this guy square. He's just a little square man. And the Galan, which is the elegant man. So Rocambole went to visit her and say, "You now have inherited 300 million. And then the question she asks is, "Why 300 million? 300 pesos will do." I say, if anybody in their dreams thinks that they reject 300 million, they're going to be shot in the back. He said, get very annoyed. And the dialogue of Rocambole with this woman who read all the books by Rocambole, as Arlt did, are absolutely fantastic. Everything is so juicy, you don't know where to start, because all the characters of the dreams she had laugh at her, but when she turns her back, she goes, it's like a bunch of idiots. But it's the most tragic novel. I ruin it for you. She ends killing herself. It's a very tragic ending to what is to be one of the funniest stories Arlt has ever written. Did anybody read 300 Millions? You don't know what you're missing. It's just amazing.
Plays are never put on, are they?
We did, yeah. Well, it was actually,
but now are they remembered?
We still do. Apparently, I've been told from Argentinian friends that Arlt theater is now represented practically everywhere, all the time.
Okay.
There are photographs and films as well of the play. It was done for something called Teatro del Pueblo, who was a poor people's theater. It was actually done by the communists. And we should talk about politics with Arlt. The plays, yes, they still have the grotesque. But they are not as well constructed as the novels. Yeah. He didn't have it, but he could have done it at the end, I'm sure.
Nick, a question to you as an English reader and person who knows Latin American literature. Arlt, I think, is one of those writers that little by little Latin America started to get better known. In Argentina now is an institution, it's a cult writer. Yeah, it's a cult writer, yeah. I mean, no doubt in Argentina. But it has taken that long, but now is one of those canons of Argentinian literature, a country which has produced so good literature. Do you think that art is condemned to certain semi-obscurity because of the grotesque? Do you see art being rediscovered by new readers in the English-speaking world? Or do you think the sensibility of the readers nowadays will be against some of the stuff that he wrote?
Well, I think there's a specific problem on the way he depicts women, obviously, all the way through.
We will report.
They're all deformed or... No, all right, yeah. And then there's the opposite. They're either angels or prostitutes, aren't they? But I translated it in England 20 years ago, and it's just been republished in the United States by the New York Review of Books, I think it is. Yeah. I was surprised that the critical reviews it had. They weren't critical; they were very good reviews, and saying how contemporary it seemed, how it did speak to people now. And I thought that, it could well be that well, he couldn't get much more grotesque than the world we live in at the moment, could you? So, any mad idea, anything is thrown out, and he's out there. And I think that he does. I think young people could see him as being what they want to read, things like that don't have answers, that are, not just simple answers, not just simple stories of family life in Hampstead or whatever. They are much more chaotic and much more fragmented and much more incomplete, which very much is what we are nowadays.
Yeah, indeed. Oscar, you were saying that, well, he is a polymath, isn't he? He was a self-taught man, an autodidact, because he was basically...
He was voracious.
Yes.
He learned things because he was voracious.
Yeah.
And if we need to talk about politics, his first publications were in a magazine called Extreme Left. Yeah. That leaves you with no doubt what it was all about. He is never a man who's been a member of the Communist Party or anything else, but many of his friends were communists. And in many ways, his attitude is too individualistic to be a communist. Therefore, you could much more comfortably put him into the anarchic position. He was an anarchist, if you like to think that way. But parallel to be an anarchist, he was a petit bourgeois who gets offended by some of the wrong things of the world. They say, I don't think that's right, that's fair. Like there is a tango writer called Discepolo, who complains like a madman about how wrong things are in the stupidest of tango, which everybody seems to like, which is called Cambalache, which he compares life as the window in a Cambalache would be, what would you describe it?
It's difficult to translate.
But it would be essentially where you actually, a pawn shop is. But it's just so petit bourgeois that it's irritating. It appears to be a philosopher saying things like that. Art has occasions of being moralistic. And that's where he sounds funny, because when he was actually perverse and brutish, I know people who knew Arlt and told me things about him. I know the way he spoke. He spoke loud, apparently quite loud. He dragged the words, like John Wayne in a way. But he wanted to be heard, and he was always very aggressive. And he would actually insult people with no problems at all. It would be once a homage to one of the colleagues who was leaving the newspaper or something. And then when everybody says how wonderful he was, he said, that guy is rotten. That guy would have sold his soul for half an eaten pear. He's a guy that never had problems, because he was a big guy as well. And he practiced boxing. He was strong. By the way, in case you care, he was a very handsome man. And he was inordinately successful with women. And he was a bit of a womanizer. He married a woman in 1922, I think. And he was annoyed because nobody told him that she had TB. And in those days, TB was... And then he was really annoyed, and he hated her. They married, but he actually had a daughter with her and everything else. But he had no friendship, no love, nothing for her, and he spoke terribly of her. There is a fantastic letter he sent to his daughter saying how terrible their life together is. And he dedicates her, El Jorobadito, with love and affection, publicly.
Oscar brought his own version, second edition, look at this book, from Editorial Colección Claridad, Clarity. And this is Claridad, he says, Revista de Arte, Crítica y Letras, Tribuna del Pensamiento Izquierdista. So, kind of a platform for lefty lefty political thought. So yes, I mean he was a lefty, an anarchist.
No.
He wasn't a lefty?
You never call him like that.
No?
You never pinpoint him. He would never have liked that to be told, oh, you are a communist. He said, the astrologist, when he talks about the revolution, he doesn't know if it's going to be a fascist or a communist revolution. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. He says something like, what we need to prepare is something which is so convoluted, so mixed of everything that looks like a Russian salad, he says. It's the kind of revolution he's thinking about, and nobody will know what's going on.
But the thing is, you have to understand now, he's got a lot of sketches of Buenos Aires, Aguafuertes. This time are not in Buenos Aires. He was sent by the newspaper to Santiago del Estero. It's in the northeast of Argentina, northwest actually. An inordinately dry place, and that time they have a drought which lasted many years, and people were dying. And the anger that Arlt feels for the government not doing anything for these poor people, and the description he made of the teachers trying to teach these poor kids that try to be educated in the middle of hunger, in the middle of drought and dust, and all the horror animals dying around them, and nobody cares. They go without eating. They have to walk. He was so incredibly powerful writing about the rights of people that his sketches were discussed in the Congress of Buenos Aires, because he was a man who practically did something. Most of the left people of Argentina of the period were talking about theory. This guy did something about it. He actually speaks very highly of the working classes, even if he thinks in many ways they are brutally treated by bosses, but they are not dealt in the model of a proletarian man by Marx or Engels. It's just like beasts, animals being treated like Frankenstein was a beast. And apparently Marx loved Frankenstein by Mary Shelley because he thought workers were monsters invented by, the capitalism.
And Oscar, he was very well read at the time. He was widely read in El Mundo.
Newspaper, yeah.
Yeah, because of his Aguafuertes en El Mundo.
Very large. He had a very large
readership.
Yeah. And my father knew of him. My father was an anarchist of all things.
Good. Now let's talk about Arlt the inventor. We're talking about the polymath, but he is in the stories. I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, it's all throughout the novels. This business inventing things.
Yeah,
he's trying to invent. What does he want to invent? And the use of stuff. He talks about how the guy who invented the pencil with the little rubber on the top became a millionaire. All that sort of stuff. Make things useful. Young man and stuff. It is always. It's in certain ways kind of incongruous, isn't it? It doesn't go with the stories, but they're there.
But it's also the autodidact, no? He takes a bit from here, takes a bit from there, takes a bit from everywhere. And the fascination with science, the very beautiful thing, of course, in the Seven Madmen is the copper rose that he wants them, which is an extraordinary invention. You can dry clean.
Dry clean for dogs.
Yeah,
they wanted to make dogs in color.
So I think the sort of scientific thing is up to a certain point again, where he's not a proper scientist. He wouldn't understand the maths, I don't think. But he's fascinated by that. It's this kind of idea of Argentina in the 20s, and then in 30s. In 1930, of course, you get the first military intervention, where it was an effervescence of everything. No, it was as you were saying, there were people from everywhere and people with mad ideas and people. In a way, it almost should have been hopeful that there was so much going on, but again, as so often in Argentina, it was a failure. Very little of that happened.
He was a European man who lived in Argentina, and he actually, Baigorri Velar was from Spain somewhere, and he actually invented a machinery that would make it rain, and therefore he was paid millions by the government to make it rain. And then he decided finally, after spending fortunes from the government, that he needed to prove it. And he said, well, such a day will rain. And it's, of course, not a single drop of water falling from the sky. But people like that existed, for real.
Well, if anybody knows about the history of the atomic bomb, the Argentinian atomic bomb.
Yeah, there was such a thing.
There was such a thing,
That was for Perón. That was a bit later.
And he was
actually a scientist from...
But he was a mathematician in a primary school.
Well,
Indeed, yes. But he
didn't have a problem with it.
Yeah. But in La Nación, tenemos la atómica. We have the atomic bomb, but in fact the whole thing was.
We did have detonated one of them in Isla Huemul in Neuquén. Yeah.
We're gonna finish now, and we're gonna open questions to the public. If you want to know, there's so much to know. Oscar will be the person to answer some of the questions, and also this about Arlt's personal life, because he was an interesting character. He basically lived 42 years, but a full life. Died of a heart attack, climbing the stairs towards his flat.
He actually wanted to prove. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You have to be careful." He smoked a lot. That's another story. But he did gymnastics, and it was. In those days, they used to call it gymnasia sueca. I don't know why it was Swedish gymnastics, calisthenics, and so on. But he was told, well, you have to be careful. You're smoking too much. That's not very good. So you have to be careful. And the guy said, no, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. And then he just climbed to the top of his building, and then he got home and died. As simple as that.
And apparently his coffin was removed by a crane from the flat or something.
I don't know, possibly. Yeah. Sounds good.
Sounds Arltian.
I don't know for a fact.
Sounds Arltian.
The woman I knew, she was the daughter of Mucio Sáenz Peñas, the man who was the publisher of El Mundo, the editor, the general manager of El Mundo, was where he published Aguafuertes Porteñas. She carried the urn with the ashes because his wife was pregnant, and she was quite advanced, waiting for a baby, and then she couldn't go herself. And they went to El Tigre, which is a river delta in the north of Buenos Aires, and they disposed of the ashes there. Yeah.
Okay. And Nick, very, very last questions. If you recommend anybody to start reading art in English, which novel would you recommend for them to start with?
Definitely the Seven Madmen. Yeah. It's interesting that I translated 20 years ago and published here in Britain by Serpent's Tail. Yeah. But they couldn't see that if you published that, you had to do the flamethrowers.
But Oscar talked about that. Even Editorial Cathedral has the mistake. They got los siete locos. They don't have lanzallamas in this editorial. No, they did. Now they have corrected it. The lanzallamas I have is a different editorial. But anyway.
So definitely start with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a superb novel. Probably one of the best novels ever written in the Spanish-speaking world. It's so contrasting. It's just, you will not read anything like it anywhere else. That's for sure.
Locos is partially a better novel. It got more invention in Lanzallamas when it doesn't get boring talking about existential anguish. So sometimes I have to pass the pages. I say,
and the reason why, when you finish Siete Locos, you realize it's an ending novel. Yeah. The story, where does it go? Well, you finish with like high and dry. You finish high and dry. But I'm going to stop there. Any questions for Oscar and Nick about Roberto Arlt? Please, anybody who feels inclined to ask a question, they will be more than welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about the drawings?
Yeah.
What about the inspiration? Why you started?
Why? I always loved art. I started to do it when I was maybe... It's interesting. Can I answer that question in a bit more convolutedly? For me, art is more important. I'm not a scholar. I cannot understand about literature. I read books. I read all kinds of books. But to me, art had a more important aspect than anything else. He makes me draw. At 16, he actually started to make me draw. And like, after I read art, I saw a book by Goya, the Pinturas Negras de Goya. And I said, Jesus, these are illustrations of art. This is what I want to draw. And I became instantly more affected by art than by any painter, any artist ever was. And to me, it was essential. There were 2 or 3 artists in Argentina who were very artian. One of them was, it's very difficult to find his work, but I knew his widow, so I saw him at home, actually. Was Guillermo Facio Ebecker. He wanted to see Facio, no Faccio, because he was an anarchist anyway. But that man drew like art would have actually written. And they knew each other. They worked in the theater together. And I think in many ways, I will say something very strange, and people may actually try to understand it in their own ways. The best thing that happened in graphic art in Argentina were the cartoonists. The magazines published in the period of art, they were amazing. There were some fantastic artists, many Spanish, many French, many Argentinians, but it was surrounded by very good art. And later on, slightly, maybe at the time art was dying or about to die, there were 2 important magazines where one was Patoruzú and the other one was Ricotipo. The important thing about those 2 satirical magazines, they talk about the streets of Buenos Aires, And the people drawn is the people of the streets of Buenos Aires, as Arlt in his Aguafuertes described the man who is about to commit suicide, or the man who gets bored in a bar and doesn't go home until his wife sent the daughter to say, come on, mommy's waiting for you, so on and so forth. So they were very similar, and in many ways my great admiration goes for three guys. One of them was Di Vito, amazing artist, beautiful man. I met him luckily for me. The other one was Calais, who drew Buenos Aires en camiseta, Buenos Aires in a vest, which is about the little miracles of the people. The people had to pay the furniture in quotes and things like that. And the other one should have been then definitely, I think, Interno. Not for what he drew, though he drew very well. It's because he published an interesting magazine where he put people on different positions. Some of them were cute and stupid, and some of them were punchy and aggressive. And it was amazing to read it every week, because you got the three guys in every magazine and you read it. It was an essential compliment, if you like. Compliment. Well, one of them was Rico Tipo. Rico Tipo means a nice guy, good fellow. Paterusu was more nationalistic, and that pissed me off a bit. But when he did Chronicles of Buenos Aires, they had 2 or 3 guys, and most of them were European. And funny enough, one important detail, this is very essential to me to say, Jewish. Jewish people in Argentina has a fantastic tradition of being sardonic, intelligent, and aware. For all the problems they had when they brought running away from the Tsar of Russia or whatever he was, and not to mention Adolf Hitler anyway. But it's important to say those guys were, to me, very relative to the art of... Sorry, you answered me. You asked me a question, why art?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and anybody who knows Oscar's drawing will agree with his arty and Angoyesque. Yes.
I wish I was.
And no, you are definitely and very talented in that sense. And the other thing that we have to explain is that the facho, no facho, that's a joke in Spanish, because facho is a kind of colloquial term of a fascist. Un facho is a fascist, yes. Anyway, any other questions?
Come on, don't be shy. Yeah.
At the back.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely fascinating. You are saying that art depicted women either as prostitutes or as angels.
No, some of them are, yeah. No, it's not quite like that. Art cannot be pinpointed. Art is not a misogynist. Art is in love with women, and he said in many pages, the whole book's dedicated to women. Like in the Aguafuertes, there are feminine secrets. That's a bit arrogant. This is the title written by the publisher, not by Arlt. But Arlt has an enormous affection for working women. And he wrote in Aguafuertes Españolas, because Arlt actually went to Spain and he went to Africa as well, about the condition of the women in Islam. I hope not to offend anybody here, but he actually, in 1935-36, he wrote fantastic diatribes against the way in which women were treated in those nations, treated like animals. And Arlt had the guts to say that. I don't remember any writer of the period defending Muslim women at the time, unless they were from the Muslim world, I suppose. Now, Arlt always wrote with enormous affection and admiration about working women, because they found them being brutalized by husbands and then yet had to go and be brutalized by a boss. And he wrote beautiful and quite specific Aguafuertes on that. And he did it. But he also had, like many women can also be like men and not be admirable and wonderful. I think when he just deal with them, he deal with them in a hard, sharp way. But it's also a character invented by his mythology of monsters. They don't say women are monsters. He say these women are monsters. And I think it's clearly, anybody can read that. It's a rather positive and complex character in Los Siete Locos, which is Elsa, which is
his wife.
Erdogan's wife.
Yeah, his wife.
And Erdogan is so perverse, so incredibly stupid, that I start to imagine she's been having affairs. And so
well, sex with the captain.
But
the captain.
No,
with the captain.
She ran away because the man actually made a nasty gesture towards her.
Yeah,
she went to a convent.
Yes.
She makes a beautiful description of what her life was.
It'd be interesting to see what women think about the female characters. Part of the despair in Arlt is this: you have a glimpse of purity, and you wish you could attain it, but you never manage to attain it, and yet women seem to offer that possibility of purity.
Yes.
Because when the girl from the Spilas girl actually feels so saddened for him being the way he is, so tortured, so screwed up, then she wants to offer herself to him and takes her clothes off. And it's an act of love, of inordinate innocence and beauty, really beautifully described by Arlt. He can be beautiful when he wants to be beautiful. And then Erdogan looks at her naked and says, "You look good, don't you?" Insulting, it's so embarrassing. I thought,
it is painful to read.
That is the character.
And it's true. I mean, Elsa is the seeing in him, that kind of stuff. So it is very contrasting.
Well, one thing is to remember why, women are not only middle class young women, and women can be moms. And there is several incredibly good aguafuertes, these is sketches about mothers. And one of them actually mentions Gorky's mom, and he talks with enormous love for this woman who suddenly becomes a revolutionary. I don't know who read actually Gorky's mother, which is a fabulous story. It's about a woman who tried to pacify everything, make everybody feel happy, and the son is brutalized by the Cossacks, and finally she goes with a red flag. You know, it's Gorky, he was a communist, what's wrong with it? And then she gets shot. And it's an amazing, beautiful, moving story. And he talks about the film by Mark Donskoy, I think was the author, the director. But he said, no, they don't do that to mothers. He gets annoyed, angry. And it's true. It's again to do with the Italian thing of Argentina. So mother is saints and so on.
Well, Silvio's mother asked him to go and get a job, and he goes to get a job. But it just occurred just now to me that you got women confronting men in art. They confront their men. They are not passive spectators. Some of them are passive spectators, but you got women fighting against their men, insulting them, good for nothing, that kind of stuff. There's always women confronting men in their own silly, chauvinistic ways, I presume.
But art actually has so many spectrums. It's impossible to simplify.
Indeed.
Anybody else's? I think you should.
Any other question? Any question?
Just one more. What is the art's influence?
On me?
No.
In literature?
Many.
I think you've been saying that he was rediscovered in the 80s and 90s.
But who influenced him? I think.
No.
Yeah, who influenced Arlt?
Who influenced Arlt? Okay.
Oh gosh, yes.
Well, we've mentioned quite a few. Dostoevsky.
Yes, definitely.
I think.
I will mention even Nietzsche. I mean, I got some passages. Yes.
The nihilism.
Yes, I know, because some passages are Nietzschean, some kind of concept.
He mentioned Andreyev, which is another Russian short story.
And the French authors, as you said, Eugene Sue.
All the French.
And Baudelaire a lot.
Baudelaire, which is mentioned.
I was thinking as I was strolling through London today, I was thinking of Baudelaire's Flaneur.
Yeah.
And
but Silvia Saita, she's an Arabic name, so someone can pronounce it for me good. She wrote this book, which is called El escritor en el bosque de ladrillos, the writer in the forest of bricks, or whatever you want to call it. And this actually has at least lots of documentation. And here he has some of the what Arlt wrote about Marxism. And she went to discover a lot of documents,
we gain as readers from that because, as we mentioned, he was an autodidact, so he read anything. And autodidacts have the beauty of being heterogeneous. So you got these ideas coming from very different angles, and you enjoy as a reader. It is different from somebody who has gone through academia and learned the proper way of writing and things. With art, you don't have that. And also you have, as Oscar was saying, the lunfardo, the delinquents. I mean, the characters in art are all fascinerosos. They are all stealing against the society. There are people who are taking revenge against society in one way or another because the world has treated it badly.
But in many cases, it's because they are bored. They are existentials. I mean, El Rufián Melancólico, who makes lots of money from a blind woman, of all things.
Yes, El Rufián Melancólico. The melancholic
pimp. A man who is so desperately bored and wants to finance the revolution because he has nothing to do.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yes.
He gets shot, and it's the most fantastic pages written in the whole of Latin America. The agony of El Rufián. It's just beyond belief how beautifully written that particular detail is. You know,
Like a bit of
a
Goya.
lady. This is a beautiful woman's drawing, in case you care.
There you are.
With enormous energy.
I think if that's the case, we are going to say thank you for listening to us. I believe we might have a glass of wine to celebrate art in a good fashion.